Hello, welcome everyone. We are delighted to have you here for this year's industry conference presented by Christie Digital at the 50th Toronto International Film Festival, presented by Rogers. My name is Laura Mingel. I am the Innovation Consultant for TIFF. It's a pleasure to introduce our next session, Visionaries, Yelena Rachitsky. Yelena has been leading innovative storytelling for nearly 2 decades, spearheading immersive formats and emerging technologies that redefine how audiences experience story worlds. Her role as head of emerging formats at Meta, in her role, Yelena leads content innovation initiatives across Meta's platforms, developing and launching next-generation content experiences that push the boundaries of creative expression. She has overseen the launch of more than 40 virtual reality projects, 7 of which have won Emmy Awards. Yelena joins us today to discuss her approach to pairing the right technologies and storytelling methods with story worlds and how to engage audiences in increasingly meaningful and bold new ways. Before we begin, our programming is made possible by the support of all of our sponsors and partners. A sincere thank you to our presenting sponsor, Rogers, our major sponsors, RBC and Visa, our major industry supporters, Ontario Creates and Telefilm Canada. And, of course, to our media partner, The Hollywood Reporter, for supporting the Visionaries program. Guiding us through this conversation is Time's Lauren Hammonds, producer, curator of film, television, and immersive works. Please join me in welcoming Yelena and Lauren to the stage.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Yelena.
Hi, Lauren. Good to see you.
It's great to see you, too. Thank you all for coming out for this amazing moment. You know, for me, I think it's very important for us to all embrace immersive storytelling and the technologies, the places where storytelling and technology meet. You know, in my previous role as a programmer at Tribeca, I will say this before we get started. Whenever I had a submission or whenever I had a project that had your name on it as a producer, it's something that I was always excited about because I knew that there would be thoughtful storytelling involved and I knew that it would be breaking new ground. So I have to say thank you from the start before we get into it all.
Well, thank you for programming it, and really it's just the talent that we got to work with versus me.
Well, thank you. So let's kind of start at the beginning, right? You started your career in traditional media, working with participants, actually, right? What was the moment or the kind of inciting incident that caused you to make this leap into immersive storytelling and really try something new?
Yeah, a couple decades ago, started my career at Echo Lake Entertainment, if anyone's aware, and Participant Media. And I saw firsthand how stories were able to change people's lives and people's minds. At Participant and Documentaries, we worked on big social films like Waiting for Superman, An Inconvenient Truth, Food Inc., and a lot of great experiences that really just changed a lot of the atmosphere, which is amazing. I think for me personally, as I went through a lot of these cycles of filmmaking, film distribution, audiences, I started feeling like I wanted to be part of the story more. And at that time, there's a lot of really interesting things happening in the landscape. And I'd actually say Canada was a big part of this with CNC and a lot of the public funding.
NFB.
NFB was huge in this and a huge inspiration for me. Exploring different forms of storytelling, exploring how audiences can interact and make choices and feel more involved. And initially, it was a lot of web-based projects where you get to create some interactivities on the internet. And then Sundance started programming a lot of really interesting stuff. The New Frontier, which is a big inspiration, and in France, Arte was doing a lot there too. And that just sparked my curiosity. And I'd say a big part of my career is following that curiosity of what else is there and following my feeling of there's something really interesting. And that set me on this journey of exploring what that meant and where that is, and just completely immersed myself into dedicating a lot of my life to what is it when an audience feels like they're not just consuming a story, they're interacting with it, they're present in it. And what does that mean emotionally? What does that mean viscerally? And that's been a pretty exciting journey.
Yeah, I mean, I know instinct was a part of it, right? But when did you have that kind of aha moment, right? Was it a certain experience? Was it a demonstration that you had where you really started to understand what this medium could hold and what was possible?
I'd say a lot of the challenges previously was distribution, where a lot of the experiences that you could have, you'd have to go to a location. The first time I went to the Oculus office in Irvine before they were acquired by Facebook, and I tried a very random experience. It was literally you watching a movie in a virtual movie theater. And there's a couple other things there, but that's when it hit that, okay, the technology is getting there where it doesn't have to be in a specific location, but we can make these experiences that can be in everyone's home, and you can viscerally be there. And that started my push into VR specifically.
Yeah. Before we go further, let's see, how many of us in here have experienced VR before? Okay, this is great. So there are a lot of really, whether you're extremely experienced or you've had just one or two, that's great so that we can understand. But I think...
And how many are actual VR filmmakers or have made a film? Wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important, even though people are familiar with it, to kind of define the differences in the mediums. And I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about first was probably the way that I actually got into VR as well, right? Because I come from a traditional film space as well, but 360 filmmaking, right? Which I think is probably most akin to traditional movie making. I don't know whether you agree with that, but especially live action versions of 360. Let's talk a little bit about that and kind of what that affords an audience and how that can change the experience of just a flat, 2D experience.
Yeah. And, at the very beginning, people started duct taping GoPro cameras together to create 360 experiences and figure out what is this language of new filmmaking when you're fully immersed. And it's been a tough journey and so many learnings along the way, which we can talk through. And there's a lot of things within traditional filmmaking that didn't quite work within this medium. You didn't have the ability to do a close-up. You didn't have the ability to do cuts. Doing something in fiction felt hard because it felt phony, where in film, you could have a close-up, you could have an edit, and you can tell the language of an actor. And so what does fiction film mean in this space? So there was a lot of exploration in there. And also, a lot of learnings. When we first started with 360 video, we thought that you should make something where you have the audience member look around all the time and make full use of the immersive space. So we created stuff where there's an action in the back and an action to the side and using audio in an incredible way. And then you eventually realize that's a lot of work for someone to keep moving their head back and forth, to move around. And so even though the 360 component was helpful in a sense of presence, you really only need the 180 component for your canvas. Things that really shine within that format are documentaries. We're still learning the fiction component, and I think we'll get there, and it's a huge opportunity space. But feeling like you're there viscerally in something that's meant to bring you into a real space like documentaries do is really, really powerful. I think Chris Milk early on called it the empathy machine. It does really, really well for feeling emotionally connected to characters.
I'm so glad that you brought up documentary storytelling in this, on this canvas. There's a project that you were involved with as a producer that is really a seminal documentary in 360 filmmaking, and that is, and also that you brought up the language, right? Because the language is arguably still being developed. But it's interesting when you can take a filmmaker who is used to cinematic language and bring them into this world to use the canvas. And the project that I was referencing is Traveling While Black by Roger Ross Williams. I think there's a lot of complexity to it, right? There's complexity to the storytelling, but I think it's also worth noting that this medium is unique in that you're able to leverage the empathy that you mentioned, right? And also the embodiment. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, and also what your experience working with a filmmaker like Roger, who, you know, this was his first experience in VR?
Yeah. So one thing to note is that Roger Ross Williams, which is an incredible award-winning documentary filmmaker who tells great stories, we also paired him with Felix and Paul Studios, who are Canadian, and do wonderful VR immersive storytelling. And I think that's a great way of getting in, especially with traditional filmmakers. Oftentimes, they're used to a ton of control that the rectilinear screen gives them. So creating a pairing like that, I think, worked really, really well, and he was incredibly amenable. And for those who don't know, Traveling While Black in the series was about trying to travel as a Black person during the segregation era, and you couldn't go to various places. And this brought you to understand what that might have felt like. And the really incredible thing about VR and what Felix and Paul do is also really high quality immersive video, and making you feel very present. And there's moments in there where you're sitting at a cafe with people who went through that time, hearing their stories, and you feel like you're a part of that conversation. You feel like you're sitting with the table. There's also some powerful moments where it also, thinks about history through time, and you have Samaria Rice, who's Tamir Rice's mom, talking about the experience she had, which was really tragic. And you, again, feel like you're sitting there with her. So you're present in these spaces, which brings it brings the narrative, it brings the experience to not just a mental level. When you're watching traditional films and you live vicariously through the emotions, you, as the audience, feel present with both the people and the space and the narrative, which just makes it's like your body tells your story as well. And you feel it in a way that's a lot more powerful. You can't necessarily escape it. Felix and Paul also do a really, really great job of introducing the audience in a very slow way, so you have time to feel present. They also started it in a way that I felt was interesting, where you're in a theater at the onset, so you're watching a traditional screen where a traditional filmmaking audience is more used to, and then they start branching out into more immersion. And so I like also that pace of starting into something that you're used to and then really bringing you into the narrative.
Yeah, such a unique way of working with archival and working with subjects, documentary subjects, and more than just the canvas, also, it was stereoscopic as well, yes.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're learning too, is just the quality of it. And that was really hard with immersive video in the past, is you felt like there was a bit of a film between you and the space, so really getting to that quality. Challenge we had in the past was also just the cameras weren't that great, and we're getting so much better now. One memory I have with this that stuck with me, we were nominated for an Emmy, and Samaria, Tamir Rice's mom, came, and she never ended up watching the full feature, so I went to her hotel with the headset and had her watch it, and just tears started streaming down her eyes, just experiencing that, seeing the experience with her son again and being brought back to it in a different way. And when we showed it at Sundance, similarly, you couldn't get a dry eye, just the emotion of understanding that narrative, where you can learn about it and read about it in an article or watch a documentary, but it's a very different way of experiencing something that happened in time.
Yeah. Since then, right, and over the past decade or so, I think audience expectations have continued to evolve in exactly how they interact with stories, right? So you have this interaction, which is maybe a little bit more passive, but still active, where you're able to kind of explore the atmosphere that's in front of you. You're able to feel the presence of others. But I don't want to fall into too much tech speak. Like, it can get geeky. If Yelena and I were talking right now, it might get geeky. I don't want to do that. But those projects that are 6 DOF, right, or 6 degrees of freedom, if you can explain to everyone who might not know what that is, first, that would be helpful, and we can talk a little bit about
Yeah, so I think what's most akin to film is immersive video, but a big area that I've been exploring is what happens when you actually make choices in the story. You're not just present, but you're interactive. You have agency in the space. And part of what VR and our new versions of VR allow you to is to be able to walk up around the space, to move around a 3D space, to interact with characters in various forms. And I've been doing a lot of exploration over the past decade of what does that mean for storytelling, and what's that liminal space between not quite consuming, not quite being a full-on game, but having a fluid interaction with a narrative where you feel like you actually have some role to play.
How do you make that choice as a creator when to give the audience that agency, when to give them that opportunity to make a choice or to interact with something in their environment?
Yeah, this is the really hard part. And I think one thing I've been learning is that we use such different parts of our brains when we watch something versus when we interact with something. When you're asked to do something, when you're asked to play a part, you're not absorbing narrative. If you're being given a narrative and you're told to sit back and you're somewhat passive, you can absorb narrative. But the magic of interacting is that you role play, you're part of it, and you're co-building and co-creating the story. The key there is, how do you make it feel very fluid? How do you not make it feel like you're just given a task? How do you feel like you're evolving through the narrative? Early on, we worked on an experience called Wolves in the Walls, which I think was a really high-quality piece that Oculus Story Studio, which used to be part of Oculus in the past, worked on in a very high-quality way. It was based on Neil Gaiman's book, Wolves in the Walls, where there's a character, Lucy, and Lucy tries to tell you she believes there's wolves in the walls, or her mom doesn't believe it, and you go through the experience of a narrative as kind of her friend in that. Interestingly enough, for that we actually worked with an immersive theater company called Third Rail, because you had to really take into account bodies in space and how movement and you moving and the characters moving shift what the audience is motivated to do. So even like little things of when Lucy's like handing you something, she kind of just like shrugs her shoulder and moves back and hands it as if it's nothing, and you naturally want to put your hand out and grab it. And these cool magic moments where you're taking pictures and you're making a Polaroid and you actually see the wolves through that, and you're helping her progress the storytelling, but it doesn't feel gamey. It doesn't feel like there's any levels there. It doesn't feel like you're forced to do something. The narrative progresses in a way that feels very natural, and I'd say that's the key. So the bigger question is, what's the story you're trying to tell, and then figuring out the mechanics that help push that in that right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what excited me the most about the medium when I was first exposed to it, right, was that it was not a game. Even though things like games and choose your own adventure novels like are part of what made me very, very excited about agency in storytelling, I think that organic kind of structure that is almost invisible to the audience is really powerful.
It's similar with what people do with filmmaking. You take someone on an emotional journey, but now we have all these different tools to help accentuate that in the right way. And that's what's really cool about these spaces. Nothing's trying to replace film, nothing's trying to replace shows, but what is authentically right for something that you can feel more present in, that you might be able to have some agency with. And one of the things we've been lucky enough to do is also extend different IP of how do you create that wish fulfillment with feeling like you're with your favorite character, like Vader Immortal.
There we go, because that got me incredibly excited, right? Vader Immortal, for those of you who don't know, it allows you to actually step inside of the Star Wars universe. It's canon, right? And we've seen, so we see a lot of, not a lot of, but we see a handful of, so-called Hollywood filmmakers stepping into VR. We just had Doug Liman premiere his new project Asteroid at Venice Film Festival, and I know that you just had an exciting announcement, Meta had an exciting announcement with James Cameron and Lightstorm, right? This idea of working with creatives that people are, more or less familiar with, comfortable with, is important. But that IP, I think, is incredibly powerful. And you've done it with Star Wars, you've done it with Stranger Things. Vader Immortal, though, I think was kind of a breakthrough in the industry, in that something that has been one of the most formidable pieces of IP that has ever come out of Hollywood, right? Getting this opportunity to really bring you inside of it. I want to talk to you about what this was like, if it was daunting, if there were any challenges. But before we do, let's watch a trailer for Vader Immortal. What was that like, though, to actually, take that responsibility? Because that's every time someone touches the Star Wars universe, it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, and I don't think I realized that responsibility at the time. I just thought this would be really fun.
Really cool. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously we worked with such talented people at ILM that they have such a push to quality, but when you work with something like Star Wars, fans get really upset if you mess up their characters. And working with IP is very much a double-edged sword because it has the best potential of going mainstream because there's already an audience, but there's high expectations. So if you mess it up, then people get mad at you. And this one specifically, the team worked with writers on the Star Wars team and expanded. It wasn't just a marketing piece, which we did a lot before with Coco VR and so forth, which was meant to be a fun thing, but didn't take you past the narrative. This really expanded Vader's life, which was also a really big responsibility in figuring out how to do that. So there's a lot of conversation and work across different writing teams. But that wish fulfillment of a fan who loves the Star Wars universe and really feeling like you're standing right next to him and he's talking to you, and then you fight together, and that haptic feeling of holding a lightsaber is like every boy's dream. And it took a lot to get it to feel good. And so there was just a lot of things to take into consideration. One is the visual quality. And it's really hard to make great visual quality in VR because you're limited. Huge thing that ILM obviously is the experts at, so we got there with that. Then there's the tactile thing of things have to feel really good. And then obviously there's the narrative component, and it's so great that we got such great talent like Maya Rudolph to make things kind of funny and the movement around it. And I think it all came together, thankfully, and and this was a while ago too. In a way that fans responded to.
Yeah, I think audiences really respond to the extension of a world in this way. And I know you've done it with Stranger Things as well, which allowed you to kind of explore a backstory of a major character as well, right?
Yeah, so we also worked pretty deeply with Netflix on a Stranger Things VR experience. And the Duffer Brothers were really great and amenable. And there's these creators that I work with a lot called Tender Claws, who I love because they always know how to take new technology and make it authentic towards a medium versus what a lot of people do is just kind of stuff old things into new things. And it takes that innovation of thinking. But they actually worked with the Duffer Brothers and worked with the Stranger Things writer to expand the story of Vecna. And this was also between seasons and take you deeper into the narrative. They took a lot more, I'd say, creative risks because that's what they do, and they created a chaptered story, which was all very interesting and unique. That one, I'd say, had mixed feedback. The fans were just loving it because they got so deep into the narrative, but for the larger mainstream audience, it might have been a little too deep. So it's really hard to find that balance. And like I mentioned, the expectations with IP is really hard, but it's such a perfect medium because you can think of, it's about a decade or more ago, we all used this word transmedia, and then when it went out of style, and now I guess it's back again.
I know, I hear it all the time.
I keep hearing it. So maybe I'll use it again. So transmedia. You have story worlds that live on different mediums and are told in ways that fit for what they're saying. A conventional narrative, which has been perfected over a century within, film or the rectilinear version. but then what is that expansion where it makes more sense for the audience to feel like they're immersed and there and have that wish fulfillment of being with their favorite character or being in a story that they wanted to, or helping to co-create the story and drive the narrative and feeling like they've had the ability to make a decision in something. And that's why I got into that space, because I think when we're involved as people and we feel like we're being asked to make a choice, it sticks with us more because we have more stakes involved with that. There's more motivation there. And that's what really excites me.
Yeah. Since I've known you, and since you've been in any role in immersive storytelling, you have always been kind of at the bleeding edge of innovation. And so I want to take a step back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that's the project Wolves in the Walls. I think the conversation around technology that is really dominating the entertainment industry right now has a lot to do with artificial intelligence. Wolves in the Walls was one of the first experiences that actually integrated an AI being into this experience. Can you talk a little bit about how that worked, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about what's to come, right? What is the future of AI characters?
Yeah, so I'd say in Wolves in the Walls, it didn't use generative AI. It was more, no, I would say traditional AI systems, but it's more predictive technologies to make a character feel more alive,
right.
Which is very different than what's happening now. And yeah, I know I've always seen of myself as someone who is just a very curious person, so I like to be at the edge of where things are. Things are moving very fast, but the thing that has become clear and has actually been a learning process for the past decade is that the technology in and of itself is never that important. And what makes it meaningful is it makes it meaningful to humans, and especially when it comes to more entertainment-focused stuff, it's when there's a creator or a storyteller or someone helps put emotion into it, and then it's used for something more meaningful. So now we're seeing a lot of AI experiments happening within characters to make them feel more alive, which actually can be really exciting. If you can imagine talking to Luke Skywalker and he knows your name and you have a conversation and the story can evolve in a way that feels more emergent but connected to you and personalized to you, and you go on, various adventures. Like there's something very magical about it that hasn't yet been harnessed in the way that I think it will to impact narrative. I think the challenge we're at right now is you have these AI characters that are too open-ended, kind of like chatbots, and you have these conversations and they just go wherever, but they don't have any narrative constraint, they don't really have any meaning, and it gets lost a little bit. It's more like a conversation partner. But then when you go in a space that's too constrained, of like you're forced to go into narrative, it takes away that magic of it being personalized to you. And I think the area that is going to work is when you find that sweet middle spot where you still have that motivation stakes, but the character getting to know you and feeling personalized in an adaptive narrative. Like I again see that spark that I saw over a decade ago with VR, that I know there's something meaningful there. It's just begging for creative juices to take it and bring the magic to it.
That's the most important thing, is that it's not AI on its own, it's those creative juices, right? So
It always is. Yeah, it's never technology on its own. It's how do you make technology feel more human? How do you actually make the technology disappear? Because otherwise, we're going to live in a novelty stage. And I think I've seen quite a few hype cycles happen, and a similar thing happens where people get, I don't know if you guys know about the hype cycle curve, where you get these heightened expectations about whatever's coming your way, solving all the world's problems. And then when it doesn't, it's called the trough of disillusionment. We're all so upset. We're like, we said it was going to solve everything. It's not. And then you get into what's called the plateau of productivity, where, okay, nothing's ever as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. It's the hard work to get your hands dirty and figure out how to make something out of it. And that's when good things start happening, is this plateau of productivity.
I've always found that trough of disillusionment very difficult because we're in cinema, right? Cinema has been around for such a long time, and we're still evolving. This medium is fairly new. It's not in its infancy, right? But it is quite young. So we have to have patience, and we have to invite more creators in and more creative minds in. I think we're gonna have a couple of questions. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions or so, right? But before we do that, I just had one thing for you. Your work often requires kind of bridging these worlds, right? Of bringing in filmmakers and designers and creative technologists and all of that. Like, how do you, as a producer and as a creative leader, navigate that, and how do you welcome them into this new space? I ask because, here we are at TIFF, which is, lauded for all of its amazing cinema, and I think there are a lot of people here that probably make traditional films. There are some people here who obviously design VR as well, but how do you do that? I want it to be a welcoming space, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, and what's great is that new technologies and new innovation areas are usually pretty welcoming, which is what I love about it. Everyone's learning from each other. And we've done a lot of what I'd call pairings. So even, we also worked with Darren Aronofsky on a VR film called Spheres with Eliza McNitt, who also just directed an AI film with Darren for Google, which I recommend you guys watching, because even though it's a traditional film, it uses AI to advance the narrative in a way that is very emotional. And it's a short film, but I think is a great example of AI doesn't make its own films. Like, that's why we see all this AI slop. It's the talent behind it that actually uses it as a tool to make something great. And I think Eliza and Darren's piece is really great. But to your question about and this is why I love this space, because you get so much talent from everywhere. Like I mentioned in Wolves in the Walls, we had an immersive theater company. But for traditional filmmakers trying to get in the VR space, I think the question one, and most importantly, is what's the story you want to tell, and why is it important to tell, and who's the audience, which is the very basic thing. And then what are the tools at your disposal to get into it? So if it's going to be a film, like an immersive film or a 180 film, there's a lot more accessibility around cameras now that make it so much easier than it was before. The best thing to do is watch as much as you can, because then you get to really experience what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and why. And then there's a bunch of talent who's already made it. So if there's the Felix and Paul or Targo or someone who's made a great immersive video, get in contact. They're always oftentimes willing to collaborate and work, or also just experiment on your own, because nothing beats just getting stuff in. And then when it comes to interactive, honestly, there's so much talent in the gaming industry for narrative work, especially thinking about narrative designers who understand how to create interactive scripted components. There's people who understand how to work within game engines to bring stories to life, and you just find that right pod of expertise to create that alchemy and that secret sauce to make something great. I'm also happy to give recommendations.
Amazing. So yeah, let's take a couple of questions. I see one up here. Just speak nice and loud.
So I think one of the key things about cinema and the theater experience in general is the community aspect of it, and watching art together with strangers, and even video games have their multiplayer modes. Is there a way that you're envisioning the VR can bridge that gap into a community experience rather than just being for the solo watcher?
For those of you who might not have heard, he's asking about, is it possible to create a more community-focused experience for VR narrative, more akin to the theatrical experience?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 2 parts to it. One part is VR can bring people together despite distances. So you can have multiple people experiencing things at one time, and so that is kind of a defying distance value that VR brings. And then the second one, I'd say, is where people who might not have a headset will be exposed to it, which is in location-based experiences. Festivals have been doing a really incredible job of bringing community around things. But it's also been interesting watching new location-based entertainment spaces like the Sphere and Cosm come to life, where, especially for more immersive video experiences, you can have that co-present shared experience on an immersive screen. I remember when I went to go see U2 at Sphere, and I'm like, oh, I am watching VR with 18,000 people around me. It was very, very cool. And I think that's an accessibility of what does it feel like to be immersed for people that haven't yet gotten a headset.
Thank you. I think I saw, oh yes, go ahead.
Hello. So, just a quick thing. I've worked with some documentaries. As you've said, is something very interesting to not have the rectangle separating the reality. And I'm also working with some interactive elements. So the element of AI and personalizing the stories, very interesting for me. How do you see the market evolving for independent filmmakers that are, not necessarily connected to a very, very known IP to maybe showcase the work that we're doing, and or maybe make these connections? As you were saying, the new technologies are very welcoming, but perhaps some ways of where to go or how to do these connections might be very helpful. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. So the question is around how do more independent filmmakers try to make content get attention and distribution, basically?
Specifically for VR interactive.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd say the festival circuit has done a really wonderful job of being a space. Like Venice just happened, and there was a huge program within Venice Immersive, which has as part of the competition, and finds and actually gives the real award to filmmakers that haven't been known before. So that's one space that has so much attention with it. There's also ways to self-distribute, but for anything independent, right, it's always a challenging thing to self-distribute because you have to get your own attention and you have to do your own marketing. So I'd say it's not that dissimilar from that space of thinking about discovery and how to get directly to the audience that you want to talk to. So it's a combination of self-distribution, but also looking at places that do have content. Like, I know we're doing a pop-up here showing Traveling All Black and a couple other ones which you guys should try. And then look at the other places that are supporting that stuff and bringing attention to it. Those are the two main distribution spaces, I'd say.
I'd also recommend for independent filmmakers like yourself, I'm on the board of an organization called AGOG, which is an Immersive Storytelling Institute. And if you go to agog.org, you can take a look at what that organization is doing, particularly in the space of nonfiction and social impact. And they have meetups as well. If you have a headset, you can go into VR chat. You can meet creators from all over the world who have similar questions to you and are looking for people to actually work with. Okay, I think we're out of time right now, but thank you all so much for coming today. But thank you, Yelena. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah,
speaking
thank you.
with you.